Forward by Michael Ron Eslinger. Autosuggestion and the autonomic nervous system. Emile Coue, even though not aware of the scientific evidence on how conscious thought affects changes in the brain, did observe changes in his patients from autosuggestion. He reported these changes being as effective as the benefits from hypnosis and describes them later in this book. The purpose of this introduction is to describe how autosuggestion affects the brain's limbic system. From Mesmer's dramatics and Braid's research and Coué's insights, we know there is a great deal of flexibility in how the mind interprets experiences. Individuals can become so deeply absorbed in their daily life experiences that they can ignore pain even in the presence of injury. This is the foundation of hypnotic analgesic anesthesia. The ability to make the body more comfortable represents the most sophisticated use of hypnosis and autohypnosis, or autosuggestion. However, research has shown that the effect of hypnosis and self-hypnosis on the chemical responses in the brain are valuable therapy tools in the treatment of a number of medical and psychological issues. There was very little known in the 1920s when Coué wrote his book, My Method, about the brain and all the parts. Coué's patients got results, but there was no understanding of why. Many misconceptions about hypnosis exist today. However, the practice and process of hypnosis remains a consistent and safe approach to relieving anxiety, eliminating harmful habits, and reducing pain. Many modern studies support the positive results of hypnosis. Although science continues to study why hypnosis works, there are many studies that reveal the complex interaction between our minds, our bodies, our brains, and our thoughts. The subconscious mind is not just in the brain or the head. Candace Pert, Ph.D., a research professor in the Department of Physiology and Biophysics at Georgetown University, Washington, D.C., states that the subconscious mind is a part of every cell within the body. Every cell in the body has memory units. Each cell has over 6,000 receptor sites for proteins capable of interacting with signals and converting those signals into intercellular activity. Through molecular division, each cell divides into a daughter cell and the mother cell dies. The daughter cells replace the parent cells. However, they still contain the cellular activity or memory of the mother cell. This cell replacement process occurs every 3 months, except in the skeleton cells, where they divide every 6 months. Pert says, with each division and replacement, new memories can replace old memories, creating new behaviors from the cellular level. The limbic system and the autonomic model. Medically speaking, the human body is made up of 4 significant vital signs. They are the heart rate, blood pressure, temperature, and respiratory rate. Pain was introduced as the 5th vital sign in the year 2000 by the Joint Commission of Accreditation Healthcare Organizations, known as the Joint Commission. As with other vital signs, pain impacts a number of functions, such as emotions, behavior, long-term memory, and the olfactory system, the sense of smell. The limbic system influences these same functions. Understanding how the limbic system operates is the key to understanding and working with patient issues using hypnosis and autosuggestion. The limbic system is composed of the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the hippocampus, and the thalamus gland within the brain. When we think, the limbic system responds. When functioning normally, the limbic system sets the emotional tone of the mind and influences changes throughout the body through chemical messages. It filters external events through internal states and creates an emotional color for each event. The limbic system tags events as internally important, creating priorities for responses. Highly emotionally charged memories are established through the activities of the limbic system and are stored for future reference. Memories and emotions are stored and recalled correctly when the limbic system is functioning normally. However, when the limbic system functions abnormally, numerous health problems can occur. Physical problems such as lack of sleep, too much stress, or chronic pain exacerbate the problems created by an out-of-balance limbic system. The results are devastating, leading to moodiness, irritability, and ultimately to clinical depression. Often, Prozac or other selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors are prescribed to help those without the balance of limbic system. In some cases, depending on the external factors, those imbalances can result in post-traumatic stress disorder. This is the essence of stress turning into distress. Decreased motivation is another symptom that can lead to social isolation. Even more serious physical symptoms can surface, such as appetite and sleep problems. These changes result in either eating too much or too little, or sleeping too much or not enough. A decrease or increase in sexual responsiveness is also possible. An out-of-balance limbic system contributes to common problems we observe every day. We perceive these problems as negative thinking, decreased motivation, or disruptions in our normal routines. When the limbic system malfunctions, it results in a flood of negative emotions, including weeping and irritability. When the limbic system is out of balance, we have physical problems, lack of sleep, increased stress, chronic pain, and there's the psychological problems that come with it: irritability, moodiness, clinical depression, and post-traumatic disorder. The amygdala. The amygdala deals with reward and fear, acting as a filter for external events. Its responses are based on perceptions learned from past events. The amygdala is protective and prone to signaling danger. You may have experienced a response from the amygdala when you experience a frightening event, real or imagined, that resulted in a reflex action. The amygdala does not realize memories are not real. Your body responds to a perceived event, thought, or memory as though you were part of the event and was actually going on right now. The amygdala is always on guard and reacting to perceived reality. Often this reaction is an overreaction based on past experiences and perception. Ultimately, perception to the amygdala is reality. The amygdala can also act as a hypnotic filter, perceiving suggestions in a different way than intended. An abnormal reaction can result from amygdala protection filtering. The amygdala perceives all events as truth. It does not distinguish between a television show, a memory, or a real event. The little hairs on the back of your head standing on end as you read through the latest Stephen King novel is a perfect example of the amygdala activating your autonomic nervous system. All events are interpreted as real to the amygdala because it is unable to distinguish truth from perception. Although the ultimate output is also controlled by the autonomic nervous system, the fight or flight process is already activated. In short bursts, the limbic system responds like a champ, and our bodies handle the activation. It's only when the stress responses become constant or occurs over long periods of time that these responses start causing health problems. An individual in constant stress is a continuous state of fight or flight. A majority of the blood is circulating through the larger muscles of the arms and legs. This robs other areas of the body of blood flow and oxygen. This occurs frequently in the gut and is a contributing factor to an irritable bowel syndrome, lupus, or arthritis. The hippocampus. The hippocampus, which controls memory, is another player within the limbic system. There are three types of memory: working memory, declarative memory, procedural memory. The hippocampus is critical in the development of declarative memory, which can be compared to the memory of the hard drive on your computer. Paul Greengard once said, "In terms of the brain, you can, in a rude way, think of the human brain as a computer." The working memory completes short-term functions like adding, speaking, and following directions. It does not become permanent memory. The declarative memory, composed of facts, figures, and names. This information is stored in the hippocampus. And then the procedural memory, composed of actions, habits, and skills. This information becomes reflexive. The working memory. Working memory is similar to the RAM of a computer or its temporary files. This information, even though it's not saved on the hard drive, is available and used as needed until the computer is shut down. When the computer is shut down, the cache, which has not been saved, is deleted and is no longer available. You may have experienced this when someone tells you their phone number and you don't commit it to memory. You quickly forget it. You forget it because you did not save it to a file, but left it in the temporary memory. And when you thought of something else, that temporary memory was erased and made room for the new information. Other examples of short-term memory include addition of numbers and composing sentences. You use the information and then erase it because there is no need to remember it. The declarative memory. Declarative memory is similar to the hard drive of a computer, composed of all facts, figures, and names you learn throughout your life. All learned experiences are in your declarative memory. Unfortunately, some experiences are negative. Recalling those moments sends shivers up and down your spine or makes you sad. Other memories are happy and make you smile. Declarative memory is why we remember the multiplication tables. Being exposed to something does not mean it's part of the declarative memory. What is remembered has to be either tagged as important or something learned. However, we do not know where the hippocampus stores all of these memories. We do not know how cortisol, a stress hormone, can degrade memory. Memories can be activated with electrical impulses to stimulate hormones and neurotransmitters. Cortisol can degrade this activation, which is demonstrated in the video, What in the Bleep Do We Know? As a result, the memory, as a single unit or file, is fragmented. During recall, we fit together a piece of the puzzle here and a piece of the puzzle there and put it back together as a complete memory. Hypnotic processes help reconstruct those pieces of the puzzle. Hypnosis helps one to remember how they're supposed to feel, replacing the memory of pain or stress with a new memory of comfort. Hypnosis brings memories back together, completing the picture. However, memories can be as false as they can be true. All memories are based on perception, and perception then becomes reality. The procedural memory is stored as a conditioned response for reflexes. Reflexes are actions, habits, or skills that are learned simply through repetition. We all develop procedural memories. One of the first procedural memories you may remember was learning to drive a car. I learned to drive on a standard shift or a standard transmission. Do you remember the first time you were sitting in the car? You may have been thinking, okay, I've got my right foot on the brake, I got my left foot on the clutch, I've got to take my right foot, put it on the gas pedal, and lift my left foot up at the same time. The next thing we hear is thump, 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 and the car stalls in the driveway. You're driving down the street and you see a red traffic light. Oh no, there's a red light. Now I have to put my right foot off the gas, put it on the brake. I have to put my foot down on the clutch. Oh, please don't stall. Please don't stall. Well, that's the first week. What happens in the second week? The process becomes a natural reflex condition. Great athletes become great athletes by developing reflex conditions that put them in the zone. One afternoon, I listened to a broadcast on National Public Radio. The host interviewed Dr. Tom Ambry and asked the 71-year-old podiatrist about his free throw shooting routine, which took 6 seconds and was like an auto-hypnosis. Dr. Ambry holds the world record for the most consecutive free throw shots in basketball, according to the Guinness Book of World Records. He made 2,750 without missing, an example of procedural memory. As the story goes, the record holder stopped because a basketball team scheduled a ball game on the court and he had to leave for the game. Some athletes make millions of dollars a year, making only 5 out of 10 free throws. During the interview, the Guinness Book of World Records narrator asked, "Sir, what are you thinking about when you're shooting?" Dr. Ambry replied, "If you're not using focus and concentration, you'll never reach your potential. Keep your mind in the here and now. Never let it wander away. It might find something in the past or in the future that will suddenly flash into the screen of your mind. If this happens, it creates tension in the body and results in a missed shot." The hypothalamus also regulates the functioning of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest, and also the sympathetic fight or flight nervous system, which in turn means it regulates things like pulse, blood pressure, breathing, and arousal and response to emotional circumstances. Therefore, changing thoughts also changes our health. Ultimately, hypnosis is used along with other psychological techniques to retrain the brain's autonomic responses through the limbic system. How many people have you known that break out in hives or are plagued by severe headaches? In many cases, the hives and headaches are their autonomic response to stress. I treated a lady for herpes zoster, otherwise known as shingles. This illness is wrapped up in emotions. The nervous system triggers a stress response that in turn activates the virus. Hypnosis changed the client's stress response, which resulted in the shingles going away. Thalamus Even though the thalamus is a part of the limbic system, it is not a true member of the autonomic model. However, I want to mention it here for the following reason. It is considered the primary relay center for transmitting sensory information from the periphery and spinal cord to the various sites of the cortex. The spinal thalamic tract neurons that originate in the dorsal horns of the spinal cord terminate in a number of different areas of the thalamus, each of which then projects further various cortical structures. Neurons from one of these areas project to the primary sensory cortex, the posterior parietal cortex, and the secondary sensory cortex. Some other areas project separately to the insula, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the prefrontal cortex. These areas are specific for the emotional and physical response to pain. Hypnosis works both in the pre-spinal area to stop the pain signal and in the limbic system to change the perception of pain, which in turn directly affects the autonomic stress response. Psychoneuroimmunology and the autonomic model. Just a few years ago, physicians and medical professionals believed no relationship existed between the immune system and the psychological processes of the body. It was ascertained that the immune system was not connected to the endocrine system at all. Today, we understand that connection between mind and body down to the molecular level. In fact, researchers classify psychoneuroimmunology as the study of the interaction between psychological processes and the nervous system and immune systems. A great example of this is reflexology, the practice of applying pressure to specific parts of the feet to affect organs throughout the body. No one is certain how massaging feet benefits someone's mind or any other part of the body. However, it works because everything is connected. The nature of psychoneuroimmunology is in a relationship between the organs of the immune system and the sympathetic nervous system, a part of the autonomic model. Catecholamine neurotransmitter receptors work together with the body and its organs, the thymus, the bone marrow, the spleen, and lymph nodes. The effective result is that our thoughts make a difference. If we take those thoughts and simultaneously enter an alpha and theta brainwave frequency, we can bypass our critical state. It is how one talks to the subconscious autonomic nervous system, changing old experiences and perceptions through what is said. Hypnosis research shows the significance of hypnosis as a means of affecting the stress response and enhancing the immune system. The sympathetic nerve endings in the immune system's organs make contact with lymphocytes. This creates the physical connection between the brain and the immune system. When I work with people with immune system problems, I show them a 15-minute animated video of how the immune system works. Afterward, when I talk to them about bringing their immune system into focus or bringing in armies to demolish the cancer cell, they can visualize the functions of the immune system. They visualize the cancer cell as a tiny individual cell that they have control over. They can mentally close off the blood supply to that cell, stopping its growth. The cell is visually cut off from its own lifeline and disintegrates as a result. There are many reports of successful recoveries using visualization techniques in hypnosis. I do not consider these miracles, as hypnosis does not create miracles, but certainly I have seen miraculous things happen through the use of hypnosis. The central nervous system is involved in the mediation of feelings. It is connected to the immune system through the brain and the mind. Think of the mind in two parts, the conscious, cognitive mind, and the subconscious, automatic mind. The two minds must work together to create health and happiness. Stress activates the conscious mind, which stimulates chemical responses in the subconscious mind and the conscious mind. Cortisol is a stress fight or flight hormone designed to release in short bursts. It is an essential hormone for survival that is responsible for reducing and maintaining high levels of glucose, which is necessary for the energy needed to respond to stress. Abnormally high levels of cortisol are released in response to high stress or fight or flight reactions. These high levels of cortisol increase gluconeogenesis, resulting in the breakdown of muscle proteins, among other problems. The results contributes to numerous pain syndromes, including fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, chronic fatigue syndrome, and lupus. I see many patients suffering from fibromyalgia and other medical modalities. Patients with fibromyalgia also have at least two other comorbidities, which may include chronic fatigue syndrome, migraine headaches, chemical sensitivities, or temporomandibular joint TMJ disorders. Lupus is an autoimmune disease caused by an abnormal increase in the immune system that causes pain in skin, joints, muscles, kidneys, and other organs. It is as though the body is fighting against its own immune system. The Psychoneuroimmunology demonstrates the relationship between the immune system and the psychological process. Hypnosis works well with lupus patients by communicating with the hypothalamus and other parts of the limbic system to enhance autoregulation. Remember, everything is connected. Dr. John Rawlingson, the director of the University of Virginia Department of Anesthesiology Pain Management Center, says the limbic system might explain why therapies that act primarily in the brain, such as hypnosis, biofeedback, and brain stimulation, work so well to control pain. The mind is united with the body through messenger molecules or neurotransmitters. Our emotions, sensations, thoughts, and images of consciousness are common communication channels with the molecular genetic mechanisms of the body. Everything works together. Therefore, if you want to increase your immune system, smile, have a happy thought, and commune with nature. The limbic system does not know the difference between a fake smile and a real smile. Thus, the response to a fake smile is the same as a real smile. Hypnosis works well with the amygdala and the hypothalamus to change the stress response. Hypnosis allows a focused concentration and relaxation, resulting in an increase in oxygen throughout the body's cells. This increase in oxygen has a major influence on decreasing a patient's autonomic responses to stress. An example, a muscle cramp is the direct result of squeezing blood and oxygen out of muscle cells. The lack of oxygen in muscle cells causes the cramping pain, just as a lack of oxygen in any cell results in pain. Replenishing cells with oxygen through hypnosis reduces pain, just as stretching muscle cells increases blood flow, i.e., oxygen supply, and reduces pain. Sigmund Freud once said, "When a man finds no peace within himself, it is useless to seek it elsewhere." Chapter 1. The Reality of Autosuggestion. I wish to say how glad I was to come into personal contact with the great American public on their own side of the Atlantic, and at the same time, I could not help feeling just a little embarrassed. I had an idea that people on the continent expected from me some wonderful revelation, bordering on the miraculous, whereas in reality the message I have to give is so simple that many are tempted at first to consider it almost insignificant. Let me say here, however, that simple as my message may be, it will teach those who consent to hear it and to give it fair thought a key to permanent physical and moral well-being which can never be lost. Autosuggestion is disconcerting in its simplicity. To the uninitiated, autosuggestion, or self-mastery, is likely to appear disconcerting in its simplicity. But does not every discovery, every invention seem simple and ordinary once it becomes vulgarized and the details or mechanisms of it are known to the man in the street? Not that I am claiming autosuggestion is my discovery, far from it. Autosuggestion is as old as the hills. Only we had forgotten to practice it, and so we needed to learn it all over again. Think of all the forces of the universe ready to serve us. Yet centuries elapsed before man penetrated their secret and discovered the means of utilizing them. It is the same in the domain of thought and mind. We have at our service forces of transcendent value, of which we are either completely ignorant or else only vaguely conscious. The power of autosuggestion was known in the Middle Ages. The power of thought, of idea, is incommensurable. It is immeasurable. The world is dominated by thought. The human being individually is also entirely governed by his own thoughts, good or bad. The powerful action of the mind over the body, which explains the effects of suggestion, was well known to the great thinkers of the Middle Ages, whose vigorous intelligence embraced the sum of the human knowledge. Every idea conceived by the mind, says St. Thomas, is an order which the organism obeys. It can also, he adds, engender a disease, or cure it. The efficaciousness of autosuggestion could not be more plainly stated. Pythagoras and Aristotle taught autosuggestion. We know indeed that the whole human organism is governed by the nervous system, the center of which is the brain, the seat of thought. In other words, the brain or mind controls every cell, every organ, and every function of the body. That being said, is it not clear that by means of thought we are the absolute masters of our physical organism, and that, as the agents showed centuries ago, thought, or suggestion, can and does produce disease or cure it? Pythagoras taught the principles of autosuggestion to his disciples. He wrote, God the Father, deliver them from the sufferings and show them what supernatural power is at their call. Even more definite is the doctrine of Aristotle, which taught that a vivid imagination compels the body to obey it, for it is a natural principle of movement. Imagination indeed governs all the forces of sensibility, while the latter, in its turn, controls the beating of the heart, and through it sets in motion all vital functions. Thus the entire organism may be rapidly modified. Nevertheless, however vivid the imagination, it cannot change the form of a hand or a foot or another member. I have particular satisfaction in recalling this element of Aristotle's teaching, because it contains two of the most important, nay, essential elements of my own method of autosuggestion. Number one, the dominating role of the imagination, and number two, the results to be expected from the practice of autosuggestion must necessarily be limited to those coming within the bounds of physical possibilities. I shall deal with these essential points in greater detail in another chapter. Unfortunately, all these great truths handed down from antiquity have been transmitted in a cloudy garb of abstract notions or shrouded in the mystery of esoteric secrecy, and thus have appeared inaccessible to the ordinary mortal. If I had the privilege of discerning the hidden meaning of the old philosophers, or extracting the essence of a vital principle, and formulating it in a manner extremely simple and comprehensible to modern humanity, I have also had the joy of seeing it practiced with success by thousands of sufferers, far more than a score of years. Slaves of suggestion and masters of ourselves. Mark well, I am no healer. I can only teach others to cure themselves and to maintain perfect health. I hope to show, moreover, that the domain of application of autosuggestion is practically unlimited. Not only are we able to control and modify our physical functions, but we can develop in any desired direction our moral and mental faculties merely by the proper exercise of suggestion. In the field of education, there is a vast scope for suggestion. From our birth to our death, we are all the slaves of suggestion. Our destinies are decided by suggestion. It is an all-powerful tyrant of which, unless we take heed, we are blind instruments. Now it is our power to turn the tables and to discipline suggestion and direct it in the way that we ourselves wish. Then it becomes autosuggestion. We have taken the reins into our own hands and have become masters of the most marvelous instrument conceivable. Nothing is impossible to us, except, of course, that which is contrary to the laws of nature and the universe. How are we to attain this command? We must thoroughly grasp at least the elements of the mechanism of the mental portion that constitutes the human being. The mental personality is composed of the conscious and the subconscious. It is generally believed that the power and acts of man depend almost exclusively upon his conscious self. It is beginning to be understood, however, that compared with the immensity of the role of the subconscious, that of the conscious self is a little islet in the vast ocean, subject to storm and tempest. Dominance of the subconscious over the conscious. The subconscious is a permanent, ultra-sensitive, photographic plate which nothing escapes. It registers all things, all thoughts, from the most insignificant to the most sublime. But it is more than that. It is a source of creation and inspiration. It is the mysterious power that germinates ideas and affects their materialization in the conscious form of action. If we agree that the point of departure of our joys, our sorrows, our ills, our well-being, our aspirations, of all our emotions, is in our subconscious self, then we may logically deduct that every idea germinated in our mind has a tendency to realization. Hundreds of examples drawn from the little incidents of everyday existence enable us to verify the truth of all of this, to illustrate action of thought on the emotive faculties we have, but to remember any grave accident or harrowing spectacle of which we have been a witness immediately to feel the sensations of pain and horror with greater or less intensity according to our individual temperament. Imagine you are sucking a lemon. A simpler and perhaps even more striking example is the classic one of the lemon. Imagine that you are sucking a juicy sour lemon and your mouth will invariably and instantaneously begin to water. What has happened? Simply this. Under the influence of the idea, the glands have gone to work and secreted an abundant quantity of saliva, almost as much, in fact, as if it had actually taken a bite of a real lemon. Just think of a scratching pencil being drawn perpendicularly over a slate, and you cannot avoid shuddering and screwing up your face under the shock, while contracted nerves send a shiver from the back of the head down your spine. Impossible to separate the physical from the mental. We must therefore realize that it is impossible to separate the physical from the mental, the body from the mind, that they are dependent upon each other, that they are really one. The mental element, however, is always dominant. Our physical organism is governed by it, so that we actually make or mar our own health and destinies according to the ideas at work in our subconscious. I mean by this that we are absolutely free to implant whatever ideas we desire in our subconscious self, which is a never-flagging recorder. And those ideas determine the whole trend of our material, mental, and moral being. It is just as easy to whisper into our receptive subconscious self the idea of health as it is to moan over our troubles. And those who do may be certain of the result, because as I hoped I have convinced them, it is based on nature's laws. A good laugh heals a lot of hurts. Chapter 2. The Role of Imagination. Before beginning to explain the practical application of autosuggestion and the extremely simple method by which it is possible for everyone to gain complete mastery over his or her physical organism, I must speak of the all-important role of the imagination. Dominance of the imagination over will. Contrary to the generally accepted theory, the will is not an invincible force it is claimed to be. In fact, whenever imagination and will come into conflict, it is always imagination that triumphs. Try to do something while you are repeating, "I cannot do it," and you will see the truth confirmed. The mere idea of inability to accomplish a thing paralyzes the willpower. Self-mastery is attained when the imagination has been directed and trained to conform with our desires. For although in one sense the imagination is inclined in the subconscious, yet it dominates the latter, and therefore, if we know how to guide it, our subconscious self will take charge of our material being and do its work just as we wish it to be done, or, in other words, exactly in conformity with our conscious suggestion. I cannot too strongly insist that in the practice of autosuggestion, the exercise of will must be strictly avoided, except in the initial phase of directing or guiding the imagination on the desired lines. This is absolutely the only manifestation of will necessary, or even desirable. Any other voluntary effort is positively harmful in connection with autosuggestion and will almost certainly have an effect contrary to the one desired. Analyze the so-called strong-willed characters of history, Caesar, Napoleon, etc., and you'll find that they were all men of big imagination. Certain ideas were implanted in their minds, and their tenacious suggestions impelled them into action. This, however, is a digression. Law of converted effort. What I want to drive home for the moment is the law of what my friend Charles Bodine calls converted effort. Suppose a man suffering from insomnia desires to try the effect of autosuggestion. Unless previously warned, he will repeat to himself phrases like, "I want to sleep," "I will sleep," "I'm going to sleep." And all the time, he will be making desperate efforts to coax sleep. That is fatal. The very fact of exerting effort has converted the latter into a force acting in a sense contrary to the original suggestion, with the result that the poor man tosses and turns in his bed in sleepless wretchedness. Ron Eslinger says, consider changing it to, "I am asleep." The imagination should be unhindered. Let the imagination do its work, unhindered. Be quite passive. Through mysterious, still unexplained processes, our subconscious self accomplishes marvelous things. Think of the very commonest movements of the human body and ask yourself how they are operated. What has set in motion the complicated mechanism when you reach your arm out to reach for a glass on a table or when you take a cigarette from your case? No one knows. But if we cannot explain the phenomenon, we do know that, in actual fact, it is an order resulting from a mere suggestion which is transmitted through the nervous system and translated into action at a speed infinitely greater than that of lightning. Examples of power of the imagination. Thousands of examples of power of the imagination may be found in everyday life. There is one given by Pascal, and so often cited, which I cannot help repeating here because it is such a perfect illustration. No one would have the slightest difficulty in walking along a foot-wide plank placed on the ground, but put that same plank across a street at the height of one of your American skyscrapers. Blondel himself would not have dared trust himself on it. Anyone who did would assuredly fall to their death. No clearer proof of the power of an idea could be desired. There is, however, another striking example in the impunity with which sleepwalkers perform the most perilous feats, such as wandering about on a roof, hugging the extreme edge of it, to the terror of their friends who may happen to perceive them. If awakened suddenly, a sleepwalker in such a position would inevitably fall. Here is another. Dr. Penaud, in his book, relates that in the middle of a large dinner party, the cook rushed in to announce that she had made a mistake and mixed arsenic with the food instead of some other ingredient. Several persons were immediately seized with pains and sickness, which only ceased when the cook came back to say that it was a false alarm. There had been no such dreadful error. I have said enough to prove irresistible influences of the idea or imagination over the physical organism. It determines pain, movement, emotions, and sensations. Its effects is both moral and physical. We may logically conclude, therefore, that human ailments, which are nothing but disturbances in the natural equilibrium of all the elements of our being, can be cured by the right kind of idea or suggestion. The moral factor in all disease. To begin with, there is in every disease, no matter what nature, a moral factor which no doctor can afford to ignore. Some medical authorities in France estimate the moral factor as representing from 40 to 50% of the chances of recovery. A patient who says to himself, "I am getting better," vastly increases his vital forces and hastens his recovery. By gently putting our imagination on the right track, we are sure of aiding nature, who manifests herself through the medium of our subconscious self. The instinct of self-preservation is but a manifestation of nature. At the first sound of an alarm, she hastens to the rescue. A cut finger or other wound is followed by a rush of red globules to the injured part. That wonderful subconscious self of ours does it, for it knows and commands every movement of our being, every contraction of our heart, the minutest vibration of every cell in our organism. It is the sublime instrument which we are so apt to misuse by allowing bad, disturbing, or discouraging thoughts to interfere with its work, instead of allowing it to function smoothly and harmoniously. Miracles are attained by the fakers of India. Legend or fact, I know not. But it is certainly true that they do some most wonderful things simply because they are taught from their infancy to know and make use of the limitless, unseen, and yet unexplained forces latent in us, which can be awakened by thought. The limitations of autosuggestion, unknown. I am often asked, what are the limitations of autosuggestion? I reply, I really don't know. The cures I have seen have appeared sometimes so amazing, so incredible, that I decline theoretically to place any limit at all, although, of course, I must insist nothing must be expected from autosuggestion, which is obviously outside the domain of material possibilities. For instance, it would be absurd to ask for the growth of a new arm or a new leg, despite the fact that the lobster seems to know how to grow a new claw when it is necessary. There are persons who, by a long practice of concentration, have acquired an amazing power over their body functions. Cases are known by the medical faculty of Paris of men able to increase at will the speed of their heartbeats from 90 to 120, or to diminish it to such a degree that the heart seems almost to stop. In another chapter, I shall talk of the diseases actually cured by autosuggestion, and in general of its sphere of curative possibilities. Let it be thoroughly realized that thought or suggestion is able to mold the human body as a sculptor chisels his clay. Thought is an act. It is more than Bernheim believed when he wrote, "Suggestion is an idea which can be transformed into action." Certain it is that cases declared to be incurable have been cured by autosuggestion, and not only diseases of a functional nature. Sores and wounds of long standing which have resisted all other treatments have been healed rapidly by suggestion. Was it not Dr. Carnot who said, "The wounds of victorious soldiers heal more rapidly than those of the vanquished"? I can declare without hesitation that whatever the illness, the practice of rational autosuggestion will always effect an appreciable improvement in the patient's condition, even if the disease is incurable. Henry Stanley Haskins once said, "What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us." Chapter 3. Autosuggestion in Practice. After the preceding explanations of the theory of autosuggestion, my readers are certainly anxious to be initiated in the method of putting it into actual practice. We have seen that our physical organism is completely dominated by our subconscious self, which, obeying every suggestion, no matter what nature, transmits it in an order to every fiber of the body, and that the latter responds or reacts immediately. The only obstacle to the perfect accomplishment of the operation is the intervention of the conscious will or reason at the same time. What we want to know, therefore, is the mechanism by which we may acquire control of our conscious self, and in other words, achieve self-mastery. Simplicity of controlling the subconscious. The method is simplicity itself. So simple that it has been scoffed at, as all simple solutions of seemingly complicated problems have been scoffed at. But the logic is irrefutable, and its effects are demonstrated every day in our lives. All that is necessary is to place oneself in a condition of mental passiveness, silence the voice of conscious analysis, and then deposit in the ever-awake subconscious the idea or suggestion which one desires to be realized. Every night, when you have comfortably settled yourself in bed and are on the point of dropping off to sleep, murmur in a low but clear voice, just loud enough to be heard by yourself, this little formula. Every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. Recite the phrase like a litany 20 times or more in order to avoid distracting your attention by the effort of counting. It is an excellent idea to tick the number off on a piece of string tied in 20 knots. Purely. Perhaps yet it suffices to set in motion in the desired direction of the stupendous forces of which we may be masters if we will. It is a mere suggestion that the suggestion cast into the mysterious laboratory of our subconscious self is instantaneously translated into an active living force. Like the oracles of the ancients well knew the power, often the terrible power, contained in the repetition of a phrase or a formula. The secret of the undeniable influence they exercised through the old oracles resided probably, nay, certainly, in the force of suggestion. Yes, my method of self-cure by autosuggestion is undoubtedly simple. It is easy to understand and just as easy to practice. Yet the human mind is today what it was in the days of the oracles. It insists on associating the healing of the body or mind with complicated theories and processes which, in reality, is quite unnecessary. Why complain if things are made easy for you? People may wonder why I am content to prescribe such general, apparently vague formula as every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better, for all and every ailment. The reason is strange as it may seem, that our subconscious mind does not need the details. The general suggestions that everyone in every way is going well is quite sufficient to set up the procedure of persuasion, which will carry its effects to the different organs and improve every function. I have had remarkable demonstration of this in the course of my long teaching and experiments. Time and again I have seen patients cured not only of the particular disease for which they sought relief, but also of minor disabilities which they had almost forgotten. Why a general suggestion is better than a specific suggestion? The fact is, our subconscious knows much more than we can ever know ourselves about our physical organism, fortunately for us. Just think what a mess we would make of things if we had to look after every function, breathing and digestion, for instance. Who is it that takes charge of such a complicated job? The subconscious mind. And if it ever does its work badly, it is always because, in some way or another, we have voluntarily meddled with it. Every organ or function is connected with and depends in some degree on others. And if the ordinary man or woman were to begin ordering the subconscious tinkering with a particular organ, he or she would certainly be obeyed. Only the chances are that something else would go wrong as a result of insufficient knowledge, or perhaps complete ignorance of physiology on the part of the conscious mind. Don't concentrate. So just leave it to the subconscious. Avoid all effort. When you recite this phrase, every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better, you must relax all strain and tension. Do not seek to concentrate your thoughts. Concentration is very valuable and necessary when conscious reasoning is to be done, but fatal to the success of autosuggestion. Isolate yourself from everything likely to distract your attention, and close your eyes if possible. You can obtain mental isolation in a crowd, in a streetcar if need be, and there is no reason why you should not practice autosuggestion in such conditions in the daytime, always providing you succeed in putting yourself in the right state of passiveness. At the risk of being accused of tedious repetition, I must insist on the necessity of passiveness and inertia. Do not think you must struggle to impose your suggestion. The very fact of making it an effort will bring into play the conscious will, and that will actually raise the barrier between the subconscious and the suggestion and prevent the latter from penetrating. Now, from what I have said of the superiority of a general formula of autosuggestion, it must not be thought that I altogether discourage the application of suggestion to specific complaints. On the contrary, it is to be recommended unreservedly in all cases where it is desired to relieve pain, correct functional disorders, or alleviate their symptoms. How to banish pain. For such purposes, here is my procedure. To cause pain to vanish, rub the affected spot lightly, but rapidly with your hand, at the same time repeating in an undertone so swiftly as to make it merge gabble the words sapas. In a very few minutes the pain would disappear, or at the very least to be considerably diminished. The reason for gabbling the words is to avoid the risk of any other extraneous or contrary thought slipping in through the fissures, which might result from a more distinct but slower diction. For the same reason, I advise English-speaking people to stick to the French version, and being much easier to say, ça passe, quickly, than the longer or more awkward expression, it is passing, or it is going. How to go to sleep. Sufferers from sleeplessness will proceed in another way. Having settled themselves comfortably in bed, they will repeat, not gabble, I am going to sleep. I am going to sleep. In a quiet, placid, even voice, avoiding, of course, the slightest mental effort to attain the desired result. The sophomoric effect of this droning repetition of the suggestion soon makes itself felt. Whereas if one actually tries to sleep, the spirit of wakefulness is kept alive by the negative idea, according to the law of converted effort. Insomnia indeed affords a striking demonstration of the disastrous effect of the exertion of the will, the result of which is just the contrary to the one desired. Stammering, lack of confidence, and paralysis cured. Stammering, again, is a painful affliction which readily yields to autosuggestion. I have known cases of cures being effected in one sitting, though this naturally is rare. What is the cause of stammering? Merely the fear of an idea that one is going to stammer. If you can substitute for that idea the conviction of the suggestion that you are not going to stutter, that if you can say 10 words without stuttering, there is no reason why you should stumble over the 11th, then you're cured. Nervousness, timidity, lack of confidence, and still worse, nervous phenomena can be eradicated by the practice of autosuggestion, for they are simply the consequences of self-suggestion of a wrong, unnatural character. Those who suffer from such infirmities must set up a different train of suggestions by saying, I am not nervous. I am well and full of confidence. All is going well. In a fit of anger, try the effect of suddenly murmuring, I am calm, and you will be surprised. Note, Ron Eslinger says, suggesting to oneself I am not nervous would in today's suggestion be stated in the positive, leaving out the negative not. I am not nervous should be stated I am calm. There are quite a number of cases of paralysis, which are due only to the patient's belief in his or her inability to use the affected limb or member. They can all be cured easily. Certainly implant the notion, I can walk, I can move my arm or leg or finger, and the cure is accomplished. Why? Because although the lesion, which originally produced the paralysis, has healed already, the patient has lost the habit of using the limb and still thinks he is unable to do so. It is obvious that, strong as that subconscious notion may be in its effects, those of a contrary notion must be equally strong if only the suggestion can be conveyed to the subconscious mind. That is the whole secret. J. Scott once said, I have the power to create anything I desire. The only limitations are the ones I create. Chapter 4. Diseases that can be cured. Let us now talk a little about specific diseases which can be cured by autosuggestion. I must repeat that what I have said in the previous chapter, that it is very difficult to place any limit to the powers of autosuggestion within the bounds of possibility, of course. For even in cases of maladies described as incurable, I have had occasion to observe such extraordinary improvement effect in the patient's condition that the most extravagant hopes would have seemed justified. It can be affirmed without hesitation that even organic disorders come within the influence of autosuggestion. I am aware that this contradicts the theory of a number of doctors who, perhaps, judge the matter rather too harshly. My affirmation is supported by many other eminent members of the fraternity in France and elsewhere who have found its truth demonstrated by actual facts. Dr. Vacher, professor of the School of Psychotherapeutics in Paris, and a distinguished member of the growing corps of physicians who have begun to employ autosuggestion and suggestion as an adjunct to the ordinary resources of medicine, cited recently that the case of a young woman cured of ulcers in the stomach by the new method. There was no diagnostic error. X-ray photographs had been taken. A surgical operation had been prescribed. By means of suggestion, unaided by drugs or other treatment, the patient was cured within 2 months. In this first week, the vomiting had ceased. The same practitioner mentioned the rapid disappearance of a tumor on the 10th rib, the sufferer being a young girl who was also afflicted with a fissure of the anus. The girl had been ill for 2 years and in bed for 3 months. Her temperature was high and her general condition bad. The power of suggestion cured her in a fortnight, the tumor disappearing completely and the fissure healing without leaving a trace, showing how symptoms may be cured even when the disease itself may not. In the course of my own experience, one of the most remarkable cases which I can call to mind is that of a boy who, if not actually cured of a serious heart condition, endocarditis, at least got rid of the symptoms, and lives and enjoys life as though he's in perfect health. One day, the door of my study was opened and a pale, thin youth entered, leaning heavily on the arm of his father. At every step he paused, and every breath he took was like the painful gasp of an exhausted animal. Poor little chap. I didn't expect to be able to do much for him. However, after his father had explained his malady, I took him in hand, demonstrating the force of autosuggestion by means of a few simple experiments such as I usually make during my lectures. For instance, I made him clasp his hands tightly and then showed him that he could not unclasp them while thinking and saying, "I cannot, I cannot." The boy was convinced. He went away with full confidence, promising to recite my formula regularly and to practice conscientiously the principles of autosuggestion. I saw him a few weeks after that. There was already a considerable change. He could walk better, his breathing was easier, but he was still in pitiful condition. The lad persevered, however, and he did, indeed, get better and better every day. And when I heard of him, next he was playing football. He was exempted from military service during the war for a medical examination, showed him that he still suffered from this heart trouble, although to all intents and purposes he was a well-grown, muscular young man, which proves that symptoms can always be relieved by autosuggestion, even if the disease itself is incurable. Diabetes. Take diabetes. According to certain modern authorities, this affection may sometimes have its origin in nervous trouble. Generally, of course, it is organic. In any case, I have known it frequently to yield to autosuggestion practiced with perseverance. Recently, a patient succeeded in reducing the amount of sugar from 80 grams to 59 in less than a month, while several painful symptoms disappeared. Tuberculosis may be helped. Without venturing to declare that tuberculosis can be cured by autosuggestion, I do say that in many cases it can be fought successfully. By the practice of autosuggestion, the resistance of the organism is strengthened, and the patient aids nature's own tendency to react against the disease. This is true, indeed, in all cases of general debility. I know a lady of 60 who had been ailing for the best part of her life, and who, when she came to me first, believed she was near death. She weighed barely 98 pounds. The idea of health implanted in her subconscious gave her self-confidence, unknown to her previously. Her health improved to such an extent that she recovered from an attack of pulmonary congestion, which her doctor believed she could not possibly resist, and she has increased her weight by 26 pounds. Sciatica, gastric troubles, constipation, asthma, and headaches readily help. Sciatica, gastric troubles, constipation, asthma, and headaches readily give to autosuggestion. There was a man who had suffered from headaches for 30 years, taking aspirin and similar drugs regularly on certain days of the week. You notice the power of suggestion? He was convinced that he would have a headache on such and such a day, and he did have one. Now he has set his mind working along other lines, and has cured himself of his chronic headaches. I also know a man who suffered from sciatica, and who, according to a letter which he wrote the other day, he had practically no pain since the day he came to hear me explain the practice of autosuggestion. And a young woman who now thinks nothing of walking 8 miles, although by her doctor's order she had considered herself an invalid for many years, scarcely daring to stir from her bed or sofa. Wasted tissue may be repaired. Astonishingly, as these results may appear, they are perfectly logical and natural, since it has been demonstrated that, in certain conditions, wasted tissue may be repaired by the exercise of autosuggestion. Women may hold and enhance their beauty. And now here is a word of comfort for my fair readers who are fearful, and how many are not, of losing their good looks. Of course, you're right. We want to remain young and fresh and good-looking, and you can do so if you only realize that you possess the secret yourselves. It is that little fairy who dwells in your subconscious, who asks nothing better than to smooth away those impertinent wrinkles, to put firm cushions of healthy flesh under sagging cheeks, or restore that laughing sparkle to dulled eyes. Yes, just train your imagination to visualize your face or body as you would like it to be, and you will have a very good chance of seeing them approach pretty near your ideal. Mind, I don't tell you that you can change the color of your eyes or your hair, or modify the shape of your chin or nose. We must always keep to the materially possible. But you can really improve your appearance and ward off attacks of age and fatigue. Fatigue, by the way, ought not to be possible if you practice autosuggestion. It is so largely a matter of imagination. Suppose you have a task to perform. If you think to yourself beforehand, this is going to be difficult and tiring, it surely will be so, and you will yawn over it and feel quite tired and bored. But if you are in a different frame of mind and say, this is going to be easy, I shall enjoy doing this, then you will not feel the slightest trace of fatigue. The best way of making a hard job is to buckle down and do it. One must observe the ordinary rules of health. It goes without saying that the practice of autosuggestion will not dispense one from the observance of ordinary rules of health and hygiene. Remember, we're using the forces of nature, so it would be silly to attempt to fight them in the same time. Lead a rational life. Do not overeat. Masticate your food thoroughly. Take sufficient exercise. Avoid excesses. They are nature's laws. Their observance, combined with the knowledge of all powerful effects of autosuggestion, will keep you in good physical and moral health and enable you to combat successfully any of the ills to which the human body is heir through tradition and heredity. The doctor is a necessity. Let me add most emphatically that I do not advise you to dispense with doctor services. Obviously, there are many cases in which his advice and medicine and care are absolutely indispensable. And always the doctor's presence and prestige and cheering words are helpful to the patient, especially if he also takes advantage of the wonderful instrument at his disposal and accompanies his prescription with the proper suggestions. The results will be attained with much greater rapidity. I want both patients and doctors to understand that autosuggestion is a most formidable weapon against disease. Dr. Michael Thompson once said, "Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is taking the pain out of the memory." Chapter 5. Moral Power and Autosuggestion. Leaving for a while the subject of physical health cures affected by autosuggestion, let us discuss the latter in relation to our moral well-being. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old he will not depart from it, said the man of wisdom thousands of years ago, and his words are as true now as they were then. And what is such training, if not the art of implanting a mass of suggestions in the young, receptive minds? Those suggestions may be good or bad, and upon them depends the child's whole destiny. I shall have more to say on the subject of the rational and scientific education of children later on, but for the moment, I should like to insist upon the importance of suggestion and autosuggestion for society. Moral health is essential to physical health, and it is to the interest of the community at large to improve the moral health of its feebler elements. Granted the efficacy of autosuggestion in the accomplishment of this task, it must be clear to all that the new method opens up a magnificent vista of possibilities in the direction of social progress. It furnishes us with means of combating victoriously the bad streaks in our nature, whether inherited or acquired, and of developing our intelligence, of curbing a wayward imagination, of adding balance to our judgment, modifying our mentality, correcting our moral weaknesses, while curing our bodily ills. Its generalization must conduce to individual and social reform, and the time may come when, freed of evil suggestions, which are so many poisons, debilitating humanity both spiritually and physically, the world having purged itself of its morbid elements, the criminal classes may embark upon a new and glorious phase of fuller harmony. Psychic culture is necessary as physical. We all recognize the value of physical culture. It is not too much to say that to its renaissance in my own country and the consequent building up a generation of robust, strong-limbed young men full of stamina and resistance is due, in a considerable measure, victory of the Great War. While psychic culture is equally necessary, it will teach us to think simply, sanely. It will teach us to realize that we can be, and should be, the masters of events and not their playthings. Psychic culture, through the medium of suggestion and autosuggestion, corrects our moral deformities. Just as physical culture corrects our bodily defects, we cannot all become champions, but we can all develop our personality in the spiritual or moral domain, as we can all increase our muscular force by appropriate exercises. Autosuggestion can be used to combat criminal tendencies. Autosuggestion, then, I am persuaded, is destined to be applied more and more generally in the world's efforts to stamp out crime. I have had occasion to try my method at Nancy upon a few boys of bad character whose precocious criminal instincts had led them to this reformatory. I believe good results are attained, but unfortunately, I was unable to pursue the experiments over a long period, as the poor youths sent in batches remained only a few weeks before being transferred to the central establishment in another town. However, the French authorities are quite in favor of a prolonged trial of my method being made, and I hope to devote myself to this task soon. I may say, too, that I found great interest manifested in America in the question of autosuggestion as a remedy against the growth of crime. Power of suggestion in crime. It is a well-known fact that crime is contagious. From time to time, every country has crime waves or epidemics simply because the mind is influenced by suggestions from no matter what source, more or less, according to the degree of sensitiveness or strength of character of the individual. In France, some time ago, the papers were full of details of a daring train robbery. Immediately afterward, there was a repetition of the crime perpetrated in exactly the same manner, and within a fortnight, 5 or 6 similar train assaults took place, the details of execution being identical in all cases. The epidemic was the result of suggestion. Only recently, Paris had a strange and striking illustration of the power of suggestion and autosuggestion, the one provoking the other and translating them into acts. A maniac pricked a woman shopping in a dry goods store with a needle or a syringe, injecting some liquid which caused a swelling in the part affected. The papers published a few lines about it, and the next day or 2 or 3, other similar cases were recorded. The number continued to grow till the victims were counted in scores, and not the least strange feature was that, while suggestion created the pickers, autosuggestion created the victims, numbers of women being led by sheer imagination to believe themselves pricked, and to feel the pain of a sudden jab. Curiously enough, there was a similar epidemic in the time of Louis XV. Another example of crime contagion is to be found in the scalping series in the 17th century, when, for a certain period, not a day passed without one or more women being shorn of their hair by mad-brain ruffians. 20 years ago, there was a similar epidemic. The cinema, the movies, again, must be regarded in some respect as a school of crime by reason of the terrible effects of suggestion on ill-balanced and uninformed minds. And the craze of the Nick Carter style of story has been responsible for the wrecking of many young lives in my country. Suggestions in reformatories. The role of suggestion in provoking crime being thus demonstrated, it is logical to assume that suggestion is equally effective as an arm against crime. The idea is everything, since it carries the germ of action. There is a vast scope of suggestion in reformatories. It could be practiced collectively. With the seed of suggestions sown indiscriminately at first, the good ground would soon be discovered by its fruit. Then, the good should be separated from the bad, for by virtue of the eternal law of contagion of ideas, the subject influenced by the suggestions would strengthen each other, while the neighborhood of the refractory ones would tend to add to their resistance to good suggestions. Vice can be conquered. To people who ask if vice really can be conquered, I simply and emphatically say yes. My suggestion, long and oft repeated, the character can be modified. A proof that education, or suggestion, does modify character is that the instinct of self-preservation, the strongest of all, can be overcome, as witness the many acts of sublime and total self-sacrifice in favor of others recorded by every epoch. Suggestion acts as a brake to bad instincts, that is, its negative role. It has a positive part to play in acting as a propelling force for good impulses. Applied systematically, scientifically, there is no doubt that a large portion of the classes branded as criminal could be reclaimed, and thousands of outcasts transformed into clean thinking, clean living, and useful citizens. This is naturally especially true in regard to the young, with their keen, vigorous imaginations open to every impression. Surely it is the duty of those in authority to see that their imagination be fed with something better than the germs of crime. The susceptibility of youth is such that it is easy, save in the fortunately rare cases of wholly bad characters, to create vivid images or ideas of good actions in their minds, once anchored in the subconscious. Those ideas must inevitably develop and eventually exteriorize themselves in acts. Charles F. Kettering once wrote, "You can't have a better tomorrow if you're thinking about yesterday all the time." Chapter 6. Autosuggestion and the Education of Children. Paradoxical as it may appear to those who have not fully understood the principles and working of autosuggestion, the education of a child begins even before it's born. Without going back to explanations which I have given in previous chapters, I need only say that the imagination plays the supreme role in every function of life, and that by disciplining it, or in other words by exercising autosuggestion, a prospective mother can not only determine the sex of her child, that has been demonstrated by certain medical authorities, but also to a large degree its physical and moral characteristics. She has only to let her imagination deposit in her subconscious mind the image of the son or daughter she desires and the qualities she wishes the still unborn infant to possess. The result is assured. Even more important, perhaps, is the fact that such a child will yield more readily than most to suggestion, which does not mean that its character is likely to be weak. On the contrary, the probabilities are that it will, as it grows up, exchange suggestions for autosuggestion and achieve perfect self-mastery. It only must be remembered that our acts and deeds are, for the most part, the result of past outside suggestions or examples. The importance of beginning a child's education early and of controlling the suggestions destined to influence and mold the young mind must therefore be obvious to all. Parents and educators must be careful to implant in it only good suggestions and protect it at all costs from bad ones. How is this done? I shall try to give a few examples or suggestions. They must be taken as general ones. Of course, they may be modified or adapted to individual subjects and circumstances. How to treat children. Be of an equitable temper with them, speaking in tones gentle but firm, persuading them to obey without giving them the temptation to resist your influence. Never be rough with a child, for to do so is to risk provoking a sentiment of fear accompanied by sullenness or even hate. Avoid talking ill of people in the presence of children. They will inevitably follow your example later on, and backbiting often leads to disaster. Seek to awaken in the minds the desire to understand nature. Keep them interested. Answer their questions clearly with good humor. Do not put them off, as so many of us are tempted to do, with such replies as, "Oh, you bother me," or "You'll know about that later." Above all, never, on any account, tell a child that he or she is a storyteller, or lazy, or a dunce, or worse. Remember that such suggestions have a very strong tendency to become realities, just as the better kinds of suggestions have. Encouragement particularly necessary to children. Rather than say to a child that's inclined to be lazy or negligent, "Well, you've done much better than usual today. I'm very pleased with your work. You are improving." It may not be true. No matter. The idea of improvement, of excellence, of endeavor will sink into the child's mind and gradually, with judicious encouragement, will be transformed unconsciously into fact. Avoid discussing diseases before children. Autosuggestion is quick to carry the idea to a physical plane and develop the very illness you wish to avert. Teach them, on the contrary, that good health is normal, sickness an anomaly, a humiliation which is only a consequence of the non-observance of nature's law. Never frighten children. Do not let children fear the elements. Man is made to withstand cold, heat, rain, wind, etc., without ill effects. It is merely an idea that creates weakness. It is a cruel thing to frighten children by talking of boogies or goblins and the like. Fear thus instilled may persist in afterlife and ruin a child's later life and destiny. Make work attractive. It is easy to make a child like work and study by making the lessons attractive by means of anecdotes appropriate to the subject and by explaining the difficult points with a smile and conveying the impression that it is all quite simple. The educator's ideal should be to make his pupils look forward to the next lesson. Naturally, one must instill the love of labor with the idea that labor is natural and indispensable, and idleness is abnormal, unhealthy, and conducive to every kind of physical and moral evil. A child's pliable mind easily assimilates such suggestions, which become permanent and will mold and build his character. Set a good example. It is unnecessary and not in the scope of this chapter to enumerate all the qualities which a child should possess. What I wish to explain is the employment of suggestion and autosuggestion in his education and training. We all know that example is better than precept, but we realize the truth of it with greater force after the power of autosuggestion. And children are particularly sensitive to suggestion. They are always ready to copy what they see, good or bad. So the first duty of parents and educators is to set only good examples. Suggestion to children while falling asleep. Suggestion may be practiced with wonderful effect to correct any defect in the child's character and to develop missing qualities. Every night when the child is about to fall off to sleep, or when it is already asleep, stand about a yard away from them and murmur in a low undertone what you wish to obtain, repeating 15 to 20 times the quality it is desired to provoke and the defects to be corrected. Do not be afraid to repeat the same phrases monotonously. That is the most powerful means of reaching the subconscious. The latter needs no elegance to be impressed. A plain statement of the idea is sufficient. More than that defeats the ends to be attained. Suggestion in schools. In schools, remarkable results should be attained by teachers practicing suggestion on their classes. Every day before beginning lessons, the pupils are told to shut their eyes, and then they might be addressed something after the following fashion. Children, I am sure you're all going to be good, polite, and amiable to everyone, and obedient to your parents and teachers. You will always take note of their observations because you know that it is for your own good. You are intelligent, so you love your work, even the subjects that you used to dislike. In class, your attention will be always alert and attentive to what your teacher says. You will only be sorry for other children who may be foolishly wasting time and playing during the lesson. So, as you are very intelligent, you will have no difficulty in understanding the lesson, no matter on what subject. You will remember everything you are told. It will be all stored away in your mind, ready for use when it's called upon. Character formed by imagination. Of course, the above is merely a sample of what might be said in the way of suggestion. It can be modified, certainly improved by teachers to suit their own particular needs. The important point is to practice suggestion in this form. It does not matter if the child laughs a little bit at first, or if their attention wanders, or if the morning suggestion, it is not desirable naturally that they should know the purpose of it, has become a regular thing. They listen automatically to the words without hearing them. The words reach the subconscious mind all the same, and the ideas conveyed do their work just as efficiently. In a word, it is essential that a child should be impregnated with the right kind of suggestions. Everything depends upon it. Play upon the imagination. Character is formed by imagination. More often than not, that which is attributed to heredity in the moral domain as well as in the physical is the consequence of ideas germinated by example. It is impossible to believe a child is born a criminal. He becomes one by autosuggestion, just as he may become a valued member of the community as a result of autosuggestion guided in the right direction. Bill Keene once wrote, "Yesterday's the past and tomorrow's the future. Today is a gift, which is why we call it the present." Chapter 7. Masters of Our Destinies. Monsieur Jourdan, the bourgeois gentilhomme, spoke prose without knowing it. In some way, we all practice autosuggestion, but often without being conscious of it. To a certain extent, autosuggestion may be automatic, in the sense that it may not be inspired or guided by deliberate reflection. But how much more potent a factor it must be in our lives when we've learned its mechanism and discovered how to make use of it for our own ends. The act of breathing is automatic, yet we can modify at our will our manner of breathing. We can improve our health by learning to breathe in a certain way and by doing regular breathing exercises. So it is with autosuggestion. Once we realize its force and learn to control it, we are the masters of our destinies. Babies automatically practice autosuggestion. Let me give you an illustration of the automatic practice of autosuggestion. A newborn baby in its cradle begins to cry. Immediately its mother takes it in her arms, and the infant stops crying and is replaced in the cradle. Whereupon the crying begins over again, only to stop once more if the baby is lifted out of its cradle. The operation may be repeated an almost unlimited number of times, always with the same result. The child, lacking conscious thought, is automatically practicing autosuggestion. It obtains the gratification of its unconscious desire to be taken into its mother's arms by crying. If resisted, on the other hand, if left to cry alone in its cradle, its subconscious mind will register the fact and the baby will not take the trouble to cry because it knows it will have no effect. Self-mastery means health. It is like that with everyone, from birth to death. We live by autosuggestion. We are governed by our subconscious mind. Happily, we are able to guide it by our own reason. Like everything else, however, the science of autosuggestion has to be learned. It is a matter of educating oneself up to the point where complete control of the subconscious mind is obtained. That means self-mastery and health. Prevention is better than cure. The idea of good health begets good health. And if by accident we are attacked by disease, we are certain to have an infinitely greater chance of resisting and of rapidly throwing off the malady by practicing autosuggestion than if we know nothing of its principle. Have you not noticed this during pandemics? It is a well-known fact that persons who in such times go serenely about their business, not worrying for themselves and not giving thought to the epidemic, except to tell themselves that they are sure not to catch the sickness and are almost always immune and escape contagion. On the other hand, nervous people, frightened by the cases around them and allowing their thoughts to run constantly on the prevailing malady, are certain to fall ill. Despite all their precautions, amazing instances of the power of suggestion are recorded in the annals of the faculty of Paris. Professor Boucher relates the following among many others. An old lady, after undergoing a desperate surgical operation, was dying. Her son was due to arrive from India in 2 days. Humanly speaking, it was impossible for her to live that long. The method of suggestion was resorted to. She was told that she was better and that she would see her son on the morrow. The result was a complete success. A fortnight later, the old lady was still alive, and from a medical point of view, that was a miracle. Equally miraculous, to all appearance, was the case of a man occupying an important position at Nancy a few years ago. He came to me suffering from sinusitis. He had undergone 11 operations, but the terrible disease continued its ravages. He was in a horrible condition, physically and morally. Day and night without intermission, the unfortunate man was tortured by excruciating pains in his head which prevented him from sleeping. His weakness was extreme, and his appetite non-existent. Most of the time, he remained helpless on the sofa. I confess that I had little hope for being able to do anything for him. However, I took pains to convince him of the efficacy of suggestion, and though there seemed to be no amelioration during 5 or 6 settings, I could see that the man, sick as he was, had gained absolute faith in the soundness of the theories that I had expounded to him. He told me he was daily directing his subconscious mind to the idea of healing his sickness. Then one day, he said he believed that he felt a slight improvement, but was not sure. It was the truth, however, and the improvement continued. A complete cure followed rapidly. Today, that man is perfectly healthy, able to work without fatigue. The discharges from the nose, which occurred daily, have ceased. I remember another remarkable case of collective autosuggestion, more or less automatic this time. It happened in the hospital services of Dr. Renaud in Paris. A new serum, an alleged cure for tuberculosis, had just been discovered. It was tested on the patients. Apparently, as a result of the injections, all showed an immediate improvement. The coughing diminished and other symptoms disappeared, and the general condition of all began to be very satisfactory. Alas, Shortly after, it became known that the famous serum, which the patients unconsciously hoped for, was nothing more than an ordinary drug, which had been previously tested with negative results. At once, with the fading away of their illusions, the sick men and women lost all the improvement gained, and their old symptoms returned. Modern miracles. Miracles happen in our time as they have done in the past. I mean the things that are called miracles. For of course there is no such thing as a miracle. The modem miracle is worked by autosuggestion, the wonderful force entrusted us by nature, and which, if we will only probe its mysteries, shall make us all powerful within the limits of human possibilities. Fatality, fatalism, shall lose their meaning. Nay, they cannot exist, save in our erring imagination. For it is we ourselves who alone shall shape our destinies, rising always above the external circumstances and conditions which from time to time may be thrown across our paths. Chapter 8. The Future of Autosuggestion. It may be interesting at this point to move forward a little and take a glance at the future of autosuggestion. I have no doubt in my mind that the principles of autosuggestion are now firmly established and that sound basis for their practical application has been prepared. The application is bound to become more and more general as the principles become more widely known, especially among medical practitioners. I cannot too strongly insist that autosuggestion, so far from being in conflict with medical science, is perfectly in harmony with it and is destined to develop into one of the most powerful curative elements at the disposal of physicians. There was a period of considerable activity in psychological research at the end of the last century, when Charcot and the famous salutary schools took the lead in proclaiming the curative possibilities of idea or suggestion. Leinbald and Bernheim and Nancy were also in the vanguard of the same movement. Psychological research was halted by materialism and fatalism, which was followed by a spell of skepticism and materialism. Thought was declared to be nothing but a secretion of the brain, and conscious, a mere mass of sensations, condemned to be the plaything of circumstances. Our ills were irreparable because inherited, and it was of no avail to fight against the legacy of the past. This conception colored the philosophy of the day, transformed poets into pessimists, made doctors fatalists. Psychology seemed to be severed completely from philosophy. Ideas were considered to be effects and incapable of ever being causes. Doubt and pessimism gained the minds of the intellectual classes and percolated through the masses. Abstract philosophical ideas practically applied for therapeutic purposes. But the reaction was at hand. Soon, a new and brighter and saner philosophy emerged, with Bergson and others, to reveal the amazing natural forces at our own command, which had been so long ignored or neglected. If I may mention myself here, it is simply to say that I have done nothing more than to demonstrate the possibility for everyone of utilizing for his own physical and moral well-being the force of the subconscious revealed by the diffused abstract notions of the new school of philosophy. Others will carry on the work, but I think I may say that the basis of a new practical philosophy with definite therapeutic applications has now been laid. It is admitted that the human mind is a much greater force than was believed formerly. Facts, cures obtained by suggestion and autosuggestion in cases even of organic diseases, have come to prove the importance of the idea in the treatment of bodily ills. Institutes for practice of autosuggestion being built up in London, Paris, and New York. From the purely experimental stage, the doctrine of autosuggestion is ripe enough to enter the domain of universal application. Already in Paris, it is being carried forward to the crest of a big scientific movement which bids fair to grow rapidly under the leadership of a group of enthusiastic members of the medical faculty, philosophers, and savants. An institute for the teaching of practice of autosuggestion has been founded, and I hope to see others created in other cities in all parts of the world. One will soon be in existence in New York. At the Paris Institute, a corps of trained men and women, some belonging to the medical profession, like my disciple, Dr. Pierre Vaucher, professor of the École de Psychologie, and Dr. Vera Ott, constitute a permanent teaching staff, whose mission is to spread, by explanation and experiments, the knowledge of the so-called mysterious forces which we all possess and to show patients how to use them to the advantage of their own health. Autosuggestion, then, is becoming more and more an experimental science and an element of the first order of the domain of therapeutics, as well as those in sociology and education. The creation of institutes such as that of Paris will, I am convinced, be a powerful stimulant to the study of the wonderful resources of our subconscious self. Development of applied psychology, just the beginning. Applied psychology, the vast developments of which are only just beginning, will teach us to know ourselves better, to possess ourselves more completely, to control the supreme powers with which nature has endowed us, and to use them for the development of our character and our physical, intellectual, and moral well-being. The subject far outstrips the individual. Society as a whole will benefit by man's self-mastery. The doctor has been called the last of the magicians, but we can all be much greater than a magician by merely utilizing the stupendous moral power and cerebral energy latent within us. Revivify intelligence paralyzed by doubt or ignorance, regenerate the physical organism, and strengthen the moral fiber. Such are the aims to be attained, presaging and ennobling of human nature, the consequences of which cannot easily be calculated. By means within reach of all, we shall secure an advancement of humanity, and it will be possible for everyone to feel within himself or herself the growth of the sublime force which elevates one both morally and physically. Perhaps one day the dreams of utopists may be realized and humanity will shake off the chains of materialism which still separate us from what we think to be the supernatural knowledge, but which in reality is already in us, only waiting to be discerned. Who knows? Perhaps prisons may become unnecessary when we shall have learned how even evil and evil doing can be overcome by suggestion. Backward children will be made normal, and the wayward ones taught through their subconscious to become good and useful citizens. People are still ignorant of the immense benefits to the individual and to society to be obtained by autosuggestion, employed for curative and educational purposes. But the light is spreading, and it will not be long before the new science has its place among psychological, sociological, and medical studies. Autosuggestion may develop more rapidly in America than Europe. Perhaps the study and practice of autosuggestion is destined to make swifter strides on the American side of the Atlantic than in Europe. I do not know. I do know, however, that hundreds of American men and women have not hesitated to cross the ocean to probe my system at Nancy. In America, I found myself among a host of friends and followers, all keen to help the propagation of autosuggestion. Converts of such energy must necessarily be a tremendous power, so that I'm quite prepared to see the science push forward and develop more extensively in the New World than in my own country. Chapter 9. I am not a healer. When, under the shadow of the Statue of Liberty, I found myself bombarded with questions by a score of newspaper representatives who had come aboard the Majestic specifically to meet my humble person, I began to have a faint idea of the interest awakened in America by the announcement of my lecture tour. When I found myself escorted soon afterward by a stalwart American policeman from the ship to the automobile, waiting to convey me to my temporary home with friends, and when I caught sight of the crowds gathered to welcome me, I was inexpressibly surprised and touched that I should be considered worthy of such a reception. Shall I be accused of a lack of modesty if I say that I am proud and gratified to have been greeted thus? I think no, because I know that all this sympathy and interest must be attributed to the characteristic keenness of Americans who learn to probe to a deeper degree the methods of autosuggestion associated with my name. Since my arrival in New York, the memory of which will never be effaced, I have not ceased to marvel at all that I saw and heard and read. Of my general impression, I shall have a lot to say later on. I am still somewhat dominated by that feeling of surprise which seized me at my first contact with the American people. In fact, my wonderment has grown every day with the realization of ideas many people seem to have formed of me and my powers. I do not want people to have the sort of fanatical belief in me. It is true, of course, that the blind faith is always an asset in favor of a sick person's chances of getting well. People who come to me with the belief already established in their minds that they are going to be cured are more than halfway on the road to recovery before they see me. But the number of persons who can come into direct contact with me must of necessity be relatively small, and even if I possess an extraordinary magnetic power to heal, which I emphatically declare I do not, the results of such power would be limited for obvious reasons, whereas there are no limitations to the potentialities of the system I teach. I mean that I cannot reach everyone, but everyone can practice autosuggestion. My aim, therefore, is solely to show you how to cure yourselves. Rid yourselves of the utterly wrong idea that I can cure. I am not a healer. Not a healer. I had the first inkling of the mistake America was making when the newspaper reporters on the Majestic addressed me as doctor and professor, and I was obliged to correct them with reminders that I am not a doctor. I am not a professor. The papers continue to talk of the cures that I've effected in my clinics. A bad word, by the way, for the little gatherings at which I meet selected number of patients in order to endeavor to convince them that by following my methods of autosuggestion they can cure themselves, or at least gain appreciable improvement. Yes, it has been my joy to see many of these poor sufferers benefit from my teachings, but my joy will be still greater if I succeed in spreading faith in those methods to hundreds of thousands of others and instill in them the knowledge that they can cure themselves without seeing me at all. And it will be impossible to attain that goal if the impression be allowed to persist that it is necessary to come into personal contact with me in order to obtain results. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to convince some people that I do not exercise certain influence over them. When I tell them that they must count upon themselves, not upon me, they often reply, "I don't care what you say. You do wield power, and when I am with you, I get better results than when I'm alone." Well, that may be true in many cases, but the reason is, as I have already indicated, that a person has faith enough to come to me is already half cured by that very faith. There is another aspect of the question. If I possessed any real power, surely it should have the same effect upon all. Yet that is not the case. Upon some my influence is absolutely nil. Upon others it may be immense, which proves that it is not and cannot be an essential factor in the efficacy of my system. It exists merely in the imagination of certain persons, as I have explained, I hope convincingly, in previous chapters. The imagination is all-powerful, so in such instances it really does aid recovering of health. But it would be a sorry action to allow it to be thought that personal contact with me is necessary. I want American citizens all over the continent to understand that all they need is a proper comprehension of the principles of autosuggestion. That is simply itself, together with a belief in its effectiveness. Merely applying truths known for thousands of years. I do not claim to have invented anything. I have merely reduced to a simple formula for everyday use and practice theories which were known to be truths thousands of years ago. Still less have I invented the new faith, as some would appear to infer. One day, a gentleman interviewed by one of the newspapers described my method of autosuggestion as direct challenge to the church. I confess I fail to see any relationship between religion and autosuggestion. Is medicine a challenge to the church? Autosuggestion is only the use of a natural force and functions of our being and can be practiced by Catholics and Protestants and Islamists and Buddhists without violating any of the precepts or doctrinal principles of those churches or religions. Did not St. Paul write of the faith that moves mountains? Surely it cannot be wrong to make use of faculties which the Creator Himself has given us. No connection with religion. Other religious leaders look askance at autosuggestion because it has come to be associated with alleged miracles, which I am supposed to have worked. Now, miracles do not exist. I have never accomplished any and never shall. As a matter of fact, the so-called miraculous cures are the simplest and the most easily explained of all. They prove that actually the sufferers only thought they were sick. Thought produced, or prolonged, the symptoms. And in that respect, they were really sick. But directly they were made to realize that their ills could be overcome by imagination, they were cured. It may seem rather unnecessary for me to answer a few criticisms of which I have been the object of the atmosphere of exceptionally sympathetic interest in which I found myself in America. But I'm anxious to clear away all misunderstandings. I wish to be taken seriously by serious-minded people. I want everyone to be convinced that the theories I advance, reduced as they are to the simplest expression, are nevertheless built upon groundwork of scientific fact.